Shanghai, 2026. Walking through the once thriving Qiupu Securities district, the silence is deafening. Only a few years ago, this was the beating heart of youthful ambition. Today, retail spaces that once commanded monthly rents of 70,000 renminbi, roughly £8,000, are sitting derelict. Even at a desperate asking price of £50 to £100, there are no takers. In the blink of an eye, 99% of the commercial value in this district has simply evaporated. For decades, we have been told a specific story about China, the world's factory, the unstoppable one. For billion-strong consumer market, and the world's second-largest GDP. In a nation of this scale, the streets should be buzzing, and the youth should be looking toward a bright, stable future. Yet, the reality unfolding on the ground is the polar opposite. Something fundamental has broken within the world's second-largest economy. In today's deep dive investigation, we are stripping back the state-sanctioned optimism to examine the 7 critical fractures in the Chinese system. From the collapse of the property market to the consumption cliff and the collective despair of a generation, we will explain exactly why the Chinese miracle is hitting a brick wall. Before we weigh the evidence, if you find these global economic insights valuable, do consider subscribing to stay ahead of the curve. The first and most devastating sign is the disintegration of the real estate sector. To understand China, you must understand that for the average citizen, property isn't just an investment, it is their entire life's work. According to data compiled from the 2025 fiscal year, between 70% and 85% of Chinese household wealth is locked in real estate. To put that in a British context, imagine if the vast majority of your pension, your savings, and your security depended entirely on the valuation of a single flat. Now, imagine that value plummeting. The crisis is no longer confined to the headlines of 2021. While the world watched the initial collapse of Evergrande, the contagion has since spread to every corner of the industry. By late 2025, investment in property development had fallen by a staggering 15.9% year-on-year, with new construction starts dropping by over 20%. In the so-called Tier 2 and Tier 3 provincial cities, apartment prices have retreated by an average of 20%, with some regions seeing values halved. This isn't just a market correction, it is the evaporation of the middle-class dream. When a family spends £100,000 on a home only to see it worth £50,000 a year later, their consumer confidence doesn't just dip, it vanishes. Real estate accounts for roughly 25% of China's total GDP. It is the foundation stone of their economy. If the foundation cracks, the entire skyscraper, no matter how glittering its facade, becomes structurally unsound. We are witnessing the pillars of the Chinese miracle turn to dust, and for the millions of families involved, there is no safety net in sight. This leads us to the second, perhaps more visceral, warning sign, the great cry of despair from China's youth. There is a haunting saying circulating in Beijing today: half the country is looking for a job. While that might be a touch of dramatic flair, the data from the tail end of 2025 paints a grim picture. In August 2025, the unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds, excluding students, hit a record 18. 1 in 5 young people is effectively sidelined. But the sheer scale of the challenge is best illustrated by the 2025 graduating class, a staggering 12.2 million students entered the workforce at once, the largest in history. Think of it as a brutal game of musical chairs. While 12.2 million graduates are circling the room, the economy is only providing 5 million chairs. When the music stops, 7 million people are left standing with nowhere to go. This has fundamentally devalued the university degree. A decade ago, a diploma was a golden ticket to the middle class. Today, it is often just a piece of paper held by a delivery rider. It has become a common, albeit tragic, sight in Tier 1 cities to see individuals with master's degrees and even PhDs competing for courier shifts. The promise made to this generation, study hard and you will succeed, has been broken. Some academics, including prominent professors from Peking University, suggest the real unemployment figure could be as high as 46.5% if we include the NEETs, those not in education, employment, or training, and those who have simply given up and returned to their parents' homes to lie flat. The third sign of this systemic rot is the mass exodus from big tech. In London or New York, a job at a firm like Google or Amazon is a career pinnacle. In China, that peak was occupied by Alibaba, Tencent, and Baidu. But the ivory towers are crumbling. Alibaba alone has shed over 100,000 jobs in the last 2 years, a figure equivalent to the entire population of a mid-sized British city. Baidu followed suit in late 2025 with its most aggressive restructuring to date, slashing staff by up to 40% across various departments. These aren't just factory workers, these are high-earning, high-skilled software engineers and data scientists. Why is this happening? It is a perfect storm of state intervention and economic cooling. A relentless regulatory crackdown, disguised as anti-monopoly measures, has throttled innovation and scared off investment. For 5 consecutive quarters, Baidu's advertising revenue has stagnated or declined. In the past, these tech titans would spend their way through a recession, hiring talent for the future. Today, they have entered survival mode. It is as if the first-class passengers on the Titanic have stopped dining and started fighting for the lifeboats. When even the most resilient sectors of the economy start shedding their best and brightest, it is a clear signal that the vessel is taking on water. The fourth warning sign is what economists are now calling the consumption cliff. For years, the Western world looked at China as an insatiable market, a 1.4 billion-person engine of demand for everything from British luxury cars to European fashion. But that engine has stalled. By late 2025, retail sales growth in China plummeted to just 1.3%, eventually hitting a near standstill at 0.9% in December. To put this in perspective, imagine the UK's busiest high street suddenly going silent. In 2025 alone, over 17,000 physical retail stores across China shuttered their doors. That is an average of nearly 50 shops vanishing every single day. The most symbolic victim? The luxury sector. In London's Bond Street or Paris's Avenue Montaigne, the Chinese tourist with the luxury shopping bag was once a ubiquitous sight. However, within China, sales of brands like Louis Vuitton, Gucci, and Chanel plummeted by nearly 20% in 2024 and 2025. These heritage houses are now pulling out of regional cities, retreating only to the safest hubs like Beijing or Shanghai. The status symbol has lost its luster because, quite simply, the money has run out. This brings us to the fifth and perhaps most structural sign, the total erosion of the Chinese middle class. We are talking about a demographic of roughly 400 to 500 million people, larger than the entire population of the United States. This group was the bedrock of the Chinese dream. But as we discussed, when 70% of your wealth is tied to a collapsing property market, you aren't just feeling less wealthy, you are witnessing your life savings evaporate. The pain is now moving from paper losses to actual pocketbooks. In the manufacturing sector, wages have been slashed by upwards of 30%. More shockingly, the crisis has reached the public sector. Reports are emerging of teachers, nurses, and civil servants going months without pay as local governments run out of cash. Economically, this is known as the negative wealth effect. Even if you still have a job, if the flat you bought for £500,000 is now worth £250,000, your psychological impulse is to stop spending entirely. You stop dining out, you cancel the holiday, and you hold on to every penny. Think of the economy as a bicycle. The middle-class consumer is the person pedaling. If they stop, the bike doesn't just slow down, it falls over. The Chinese government has tried to jumpstart the heart with stimulus packages and consumption vouchers, but they are finding that you cannot fix a crisis of confidence with a coupon. When people are terrified of losing their homes or their jobs tomorrow, they will not go shopping today. The cycle of growth has turned into a spiral of decline. The sixth sign, and perhaps the most precarious, is the tremors shaking the financial system. In early 2026, a shockwave hit the market when a major wealth management platform, JWR, suddenly collapsed. Over 100 billion renminbi, roughly £11 billion, belonging to tens of thousands of investors simply vanished overnight. this is not an isolated incident, it is a symptom of a much larger rot within China's shadow banking sector. For years, local governments relied on selling land to stay afloat. With the property market in a coma, that revenue has dried up, leaving local authorities unable to service their mountainous debts. We are now seeing bank runs in provincial areas, where ordinary citizens queue for hours only to find their accounts frozen. When the public loses faith in the banks, the social contract doesn't just bend, it snaps. This brings us to our final and most profound sign, a state of collective social despair. Two terms have come to define modern Chinese life: nei huan, involution, and tangping, lying flat. Involution describes a soul-crushing rat race where everyone works harder and longer, yet no one moves forward because the economic pie is no longer growing. In response, the youth have pioneered lying flat, a silent protest of doing the bare minimum. They are refusing to marry, refusing to buy homes, and refusing to have children. In 2025, marriage and birth rates hit historic lows. For an economy, this is a slow-acting poison. A shrinking workforce cannot sustain growth, and a society without hope cannot innovate. Some analysts point to Japan's lost decades of the 1990s as a roadmap for China's future. There are striking similarities: the burst property bubble, the aging population, and the stagnant consumption. But there is one terrifying difference. When Japan's bubble burst, it was already a wealthy, high-income nation. China, however, is at risk of getting old before it gets rich. With a per capita GDP still only a fraction of the UK's or the US's, China lacks the financial cushion that saved Japan. So, where do we go from here? 2026 is a defining crossroads for the dragon. As the 15th five-year plan begins, the government is desperate to pivot toward high-tech, new-quality productive forces like EVs and green energy. But can these new industries grow fast enough to offset the collapse of a property sector that once drove a quarter of the economy? It is like trying to replace the engine of a Boeing 747 while it's mid-flight and losing altitude. For those of us watching from the UK or elsewhere, this isn't just foreign news. China is a vital trading partner. If their middle class stops buying, our exports suffer. If their banks fail, global markets tremble. Keep a sharp eye on three indicators: the youth unemployment rate, the stability of Tier 1 property prices, and any further freezes in local banking. The Chinese miracle is far from its final chapter, rather, it is evolving into a more sophisticated and mature volume. We are witnessing the end of an era defined by raw speed, making way for a new period of high-quality, sustainable growth. The dragon is not losing its height, it is simply recalibrating its flight path, seeking a more stable and enduring foundation to ensure long-term prosperity for the decades to come.